Good evening. My name is Levi Spathia. I will be covering today Developing a Management Style, which is the paper that I was asked to write about, and then kind of go over some management styles, what my preferred one would be, and then how I would go about implementing it, and what my goals would be. Specifically, when we talk about management styles, one of the things that I immediately always go back to is when I was with Dell, people would always talk about leaders versus managers and say that, in a conversation the words were interchangeable, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they are, that they can be just interchanged like that. You have to look at it from the fact that managers can be good, but not necessarily great leaders, because a manager just goes by the day-to-day business and goes and achieves the goals, but doesn't necessarily do anything to improve upon their direct reports or their subordinates. And one of the quotes that stuck out to me during the course of this paper was from Robin Benincasa, who was talking about how great leaders will go and choose their styles just like a golfer would choose his or her club based on the situation. And a lot of people forget sometimes that, hey, just because you have a certain style or a certain preference doesn't mean necessarily that you have to be glued to that style all the time. And when we look at this chart here that I have drawn up, it's really something that was very common across the board with a lot of articles that I read, where you see this type of formatting where you see it. You either saw it in a linear where it was across the board, or you see this where it's a cycle, but every one of them is individual and has their own qualities. And in each one has their own differences, their own styles or techniques that they approach. For instance, coaching may be more about developing and growing an individual and providing opportunities for that for their team members to grow upon. Whereas you look at a directive and you're expecting a lot more of, you tell them what direction to go and they have to absolutely comply with that. There's little autonomy, little wiggle room for them to move from. Pace setting, you're doing as a manager a hands-on approach and then expecting them from a self-sufficiency standpoint to be able to then go from there and pick up what you left with them, and that they have this high standard of expectations going from there. And so when we look at these 6 leadership styles, my preference would be, as a manager, would be to be authoritative. And the reason why I like that style is because it's firm, but it's fair. You have a lot of credibility with it, and you can set direction, which in itself means that you can go about giving them that vision, that guidance to where you want to go, but not necessarily tell them how they have to get there. And so there's a lot of flexibility, a little bit of room for creativity, but at the same time I will go ahead and spell it out that I want to make sure that creativity also falls within ethical bounds, which is just something we just covered in one of our recent discussion posts. And so going from there, going back to our leadership styles, the thing that I would say with these styles is that you have to learn to be flexible. And in flexibility, you have to understand that sometimes you may be pursuing an authoritative style, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only one you're married to, or that you're going to do every day, day in and day out. There may be days where you have to go do a participative, or you have to go and be a coach and help develop those individuals to be better for themselves. And so when we go into implementation for my style, I like the fact that it's firm but fair. I like that the constant feedback that you're providing to your team to help them improve, and that you're persuading them to follow your direction, and that your persuasion really carries through in the fact that you're really credible and knowledgeable. If we look at some of the articles that I had found, looking at Ross Cardinal and Anastasia, they both said that, hey, you really need to make sure that you have that credibility and knowledge to your foundation in order to be effective as a leader in this style. And so when you go and pursue these tactics, going back to our textbook, it's talking about enabling the team members, that you empower them to be able to pursue their own actions, and that you provide the direction, but you also help facilitate and guide. And, right there in the middle is flexibility, because you have to be able to move from style to style. And Ross Cardinal, in her article, the quote that I liked from her was the fact that the key to being an effective leader is to have this broad approach of knowing, hey, that you can switch from one style to the other and know when to use them appropriately. And so for authoritative, it is considered to be one of the better ones that's flexible and being able to give you a lot more wiggle room to move from side to side. And so then that's where I would like to supplement with my authoritative style. These two styles are participative and affiliative, because I want to be able to be a people manager and motivate for high morale, but at the same time be a listener and recognize and reward people for their hard work, but still also make sure that we're reaching those business goals. And so while these are essentially the foundation for my style, that doesn't mean necessarily that those are the only ones I would use, and that I would never go into these other techniques, that I would never approach pace setting or coaching or directive. There might be days where I do have to pursue those based on what the scenario is, what the situation is. Do I have a specific project or task that needs to be completed, and I just don't have the luxury of being able to allow for a learning experience at this point, and I need them to just follow direction at this point and expect them to just follow everything that I'm providing to them. And so then when we go into goals, obviously the first thing that everybody says, oh, well, you're trying to meet the business goals. You need to be successful as a business. But what does that actually mean? And a lot of that is, well, you got to make profits. You got to have good performance, high performance. But to get there, you need to have high morale to go with it. If you only have two of those aspects, if you only have the performance and the profits, your high morale is not, you may not have high morale with you, but then what happens is that it's going to break everything at some point, because in the long run, it's a recipe for disaster. And so you have to be able to provide that positive example for your team, provide motivation and potential for them to grow, and then be able to give them the ability to know that you're meeting their needs and helping them be better individuals within the business and giving them the tools that they need for day to day. And so the last thing I will cover is this article from Glenn Lopez, where he covered that, the good leaders, they always had somebody. The great leaders, they always had somebody in front of them that was helping them out. And that's where I would cover, is that, hey, I want to be able to help them have that business sense or that style. And so my last slide was just going to be my references, which was already in my paper. If there's any questions, please do feel free to contact me, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you for your time.